guys, it's your boy Benny.
Gabby and Jesse.
And today we're back with another YouTube video. Today we're going to be walking around the community and asking who knows what aggregate supply is. Let's get
go.
on.
What is aggregate supply?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Total supply. I have no idea. What is aggregate supply?
Well, we gotta ask ourselves the question, what is aggregate supply? Aggregate supply, also known as total output, is a total supply of goods and services produced in an economy. This will occur in a specific time period, which will almost always be measured within a fiscal year. There are short-term and long-term changes in aggregate supply, both of which are affected by different factors. Let's start off with the short-term changes. In the short run, aggregate supply responds to higher demand and prices by increasing the use of current inputs in the production process. In the short run, the level of capital is fixed, and a company cannot, for example, erect a new factory or introduce a new technology to increase production efficiency. Instead, the company ramps up supply by getting more out of its existing factors of production, such as assigning workers more hours or increasing the use of existing technology. Now let's talk about the long-term changes. In the long run, however, aggregate supply is not affected by the price level and is driven only by improvements in productivity and efficiency. Such improvements include increases in the level of skill and education among workers, technological advancements, and increases in capital. Certain economic viewpoints, such as the Keynesian theory, assert the long-run aggregate supply is still price elastic up to a certain point. Once this point is reached, supply becomes insensitive to changes in price. Aggregate supply is highly important because it shows that supply changes more slowly than demand. For example, demand can rise quickly, but companies can't ramp up production as fast. They've got to hire new workers and build new equipment. When demand drops, it takes companies months to reduce supply. Because of this, there are 4 factors that affect aggregate supply, which are supply shocks, resource price changes, changes in expectation for inflation, and capacity increase. Briefly going over what each of these means, let's start with supply shocks. Supply shocks shifts the aggregate supply line to the left, which basically means that there's a decrease in the aggregate supply curve. An example of this is gas prices rising drastically. It will either be a leftward shift in the short run curve or by a leftward shift in the vertical long run curve. Moving to resource price changes. When there are changes in the short run, resource prices can alter the short run aggregate supply curve. Unless the price changes reflect differences in the long-term supply, the long-run aggregate supply curve will not be affected. Changes in expectations and inflation is the third factor that affects aggregate supply. If suppliers expect goods to sell at much higher prices in the future, they will be less willing to sell in the current period. As a result, the short-run aggregate supply will shift left and vice versa. Finally, capital increase. An increase in aggregate supply implies an increase in the productivity capacity of the economy. Factors that can cause an outward shift include an increase in the quantity and quality of the factors of production, technological advancements, or any increase in productivity.
The aggregate supply curve shows the total quantity of output that firms will produce and sell at each price level. In an aggregate supply curve, the horizontal axis shows real GDP, which is just GDP adjusted for inflation, and the vertical axis shows the price level of the average price of all goods and services that are being produced in the economy. The reason the curve is used is because it describes how suppliers will react to a higher price level for final outputs of goods and services, while the price of inputs like labor and energy remain constant. When firms realize that the price of what they produce is rising, while costs of production are fixed, they will expand production as they see they can make a higher profit. In the short run, the aggregate supply is graphed as an upward sloping curve. The equation used to determine the short-run aggregate supply is y equals y star plus a bracket p minus pe close bracket. In the equation, y is the production of the economy, y star is the natural level of production of the economy, the coefficient a is always greater than 0, p is the price level, and pe is the expected price level for consumers. The short-run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping because the quantity supplied increases at every price level. When the curve shifts outward, the output and real GDP increase at a given price. A shift in aggregate supply curve can occur because of changes in the size and quality of labor, technological innovations, an increase in wages, an increase in production costs, changes in producer taxes, and subsidies and changes in inflation. A shift along the supply curve occurs when there is a price change, also known as a movement along the curve. In the long run, the aggregate supply is graphed vertically on the supply curve. The equation used to determine the long-run aggregate supply is y equals y star. In the equation, y is the production of the economy and y star is the natural level of the production of the economy. The long-run aggregate supply curve is vertical, which reflects economics' belief that change in aggregate demand only temporarily changes the economy's total output. In the long run, only capital, labor, and technology affect aggregate supply because everything in the economy is assumed to be used optimally. The long-run aggregate supply curve is static because it is the slowest aggregate supply curve.
Some Canadian statistics on the topic include the total supply value available to the Canadian economy in 2015 was $4.2 trillion, and some of these percentages include 11% of which was used in capital investments like construction and machinery, which was $473.3 billion, 17% of which was domestic imports at $586.9 billion. Thank you for listening to our presentation.